Welcome to our weekly CG Cookie live stream. Let me finish off the marketing here and then we're going to jump right into it. Today's going to be more of like a lecture stream, I would say, and it's definitely open for a lot of questions, but it's going to be talking a lot about conventions and how to make money at them and how to sell your art. We want to avoid the stereotype of the starving artist, and this is one of the ways that you can do so. So let me finish up here. And as I like to start these streams, if you could put where you're watching from in the comment section. And during the stream, if you have a comment for me, please put @CGCookieConcept before your question. That way I can quickly see it back and forth between the conversation and my other monitor. Okay. Let me double check everything and then we'll jump right into it. Hope you guys are feeling well. I know I've had a very crazy past month and a half, and it's part of the reason that I'm doing this stream today is because I have been doing conventions the past 5 weekends in a row. And for the rest of the summer, I have kind of a break, and I have a lot planned that I want to do. I think we're good. Okay, so officially, let me start off the live stream. Hi everyone, welcome to the CG Cookie Concept live stream. We do these every Wednesday, 2 p.m. at Central Time. If you're outside of the States, it's -6 GMT. I'm Tim Von Rieden. I'm an artist, and I want to share some advice and tips with you guys and hopefully get a conversation going because I'm constantly learning from you guys as well. I feel like it's a back and forth. And I took a lot of notes for today. I didn't think I was going to have this much, but when I really thought about what goes into doing conventions, I had a lot to say. So I'm going to try to cover as much ground as I can. It'll probably be a shorter stream depending on how many questions you guys have about it. But I really think that as an artist, you should be doing conventions. If this is something that you want to pursue, I feel like conventions are one avenue to make revenue. And as I was told by an Uber driver when we were in Kansas City for Spectrum, you should always have 5 avenues of revenue for your income. And he's actually a millionaire who retired when he was like 50. And now he just does the Uber driving because he's bored. And it was funny. He had like the best Uber car ever. He had like 6 outlets ready in the back seat. He had free water, free snacks, and it was like the nicest car I've ever taken in an Uber. And it was no surprise to me that he was some former millionaire. And he was actually a business advice consultant. So he was kind of giving us advice with art and how to make money. And he was able to relate the way business works to the art world. And one of the best things that we learned from him that day were there are 5, or you should have 5 revenues of income. And we were trying to think of what ours were, and we were explaining to him what they were. So obviously I have a full-time job with CG Cookie. I do conventions. I have an Etsy store. I don't really do freelance, but before I definitely did some freelance and then Kickstarter. So for me, those were my 5. And then I knew like some of them were weaker than others. Some of them were definitely pulling their weight. Others, maybe not so much. And it's something that I should be working on, not just one avenue. I should be working on all 5. And I thought that was great advice. So I'd want to start that off or start this stream off with that piece of advice from my lovely Uber driver. Well, let me check where you guys are watching from really quick. Well, hi, everyone. Hello from the other side. Hello. And I already see some questions coming in. It's about selling art. That is something I'm definitely going to cover, especially things with like pricing, the quality, what to sell, things like that. We are definitely going to go over. Okay, I'm going to try to rattle these off pretty quickly. So we got Zane Draws from Ohio, Faithful from the Underworld, Tijal from Golden Fridge, Gypsy from Southern Oregon, also from Golden Fridge, Miss Chibi from Michigan, Rich from New York, Coco from Strawberry Lemonade, we'll just say, M41 from Sweden, I know Knott's watching all the way out there as well. Dragon from Canada. Bamira from Spain. Coco from Northern Cali. Jennifer from Spain as well. Wes Burke, well, hello, from Geneva. That is the cookie head for all of you guys that are wondering. And thank you, Jennifer, for following. I think that's what it said. I'm sorry if I missed it or misspoke it. Kai Illustrations from New Jersey. Cesarine from Hungary. Altered Mage from Canada. Joe Pasaurus from Netherlands. Lazudian from Bulgaria. Tigils from outside my window. Can you go away for a little? I'm trying to stream. And Resinope from Venezuela. And the first question I got, I just passed it when I was looking, says, how is the iPad Pro? Have you drawn with it? If yes, what did you draw? So for those of you who don't follow me on Instagram, I posted that I just got the iPad Pro, and I have wanted this for so long. I was going to get the first generation, and then I had a friend earlier this year tell me to wait for the second one. It was rumored to be announced, and I was waiting all through con season because I wanted this bad boy when I was in the airplane or in the car ride going to these conventions so that I could draw digitally. But I finally did get it, and yes, I did draw. I'm using Procreate. This is like the app specific for the iPad, and I have been doing some little small drawings. It's mostly just like exaggerated life drawing stuff, and I plan on doing a tutorial or two about using this. I have found this to be the best handheld tablet, even more so than the Intuos, the Wacom Cintiq, that's portable companion, and what is the other one? The Surface Pro. I have tried all three now, and I can say by far this has been my favorite. Now, it could just be because it's brand new and I haven't found what I feel is wrong with it. I kind of felt the same way when I got my big Cintiq. It's like I got really excited. I thought it was amazing. And then along the way, I kind of found some things I didn't like as much. So first impression is very, very good. We'll see how it is down the line. And I think more importantly, we'll see how it is when I'm traveling, because that's the reason anyone would want to get a portable drawing device. So that will be the true test when I'm actually on the road or in an airplane or something where I can draw on the go. So I'm very excited about that, and I'm going to be also starting some Swordplay comic pages with that as well. The other thing, for those of you, before we get, sorry that I have like a few announcements. The first thing I should mention is that 6.0 is coming out. It's a new CG Cookie website, and it's kind of like an update and a refresher to what we had before. It is amazing. Every time I test it out, because we're doing all the bug testing right now, we got some beta users helping us out, but there's a lot of work to do still. And I can't express enough how much better it is than what 5.0 was, and especially with combining the community into the actual website, it's going to be amazing. And for those of you who used to watch my streams where I did live critiques, I'm going to be doing critiques on cgcookie.com for the subscribers on there every month, and that'll be something that is offered to pro members. All right, and the last thing I wanted to mention before we jump into this stream today for the topic, for those of you who backed my Kickstarter all the way back in January and February, I finally got the boxes to ship them in. And this has been something that I've been waiting for. And the last thing that I have to wait for before I can ship them out is the actual book. So now that I have everything, or every piece of the puzzle, except the book, I can officially send them out as soon as I get them. So I'll do a full update on Friday for those of you who have been waiting so patiently. So thank you. Okay. So today's topic is all about conventions. Now, there might be some of you watching that don't even know what a convention is. So a convention is essentially an event. It's a gathering of people who share similar interests. The two most popular ones are Comic Cons, which I'm sure you should probably have heard of by now. I feel like it's breached the pop culture bubble. And Anime Cons. Is there a big difference between them? Kind of. Are you going to notice it as an artist behind the booth? Depending on what material you are selling, you might. So if you're someone that draws a lot of comic book themed fan art, you would probably do better at a Comic Con than at an Anime Con, or one would think. There have been times where we have seen just with my own friend group, where if you make a lot of fan art of, let's say, comics, and then you go to an Anime Con, you might be the only one or one of the few artists that are selling comic book art, and because of that contrast, because you're the minority, you actually might do really well because your competition all of a sudden becomes very small. So don't just assume that if you're going to an anime con, you have to make anime art. And or you don't even assume that you have to do fan art in general. Me and a lot of the crew that I travel with nowadays, we don't even do fan art. A lot of us just do original art. And this was kind of a giant risk and a giant leap of faith that we took. And mind you, this is my 4th year doing conventions, and it wasn't until this year that I completely wiped out fan art and just started selling original. And I can tell you it has been worth it tenfold. I'm not discouraging fan art. That's how I got started, so I'd be hypocritical if I was to say don't do fan art to do well at conventions. It definitely pushed me, and I learned so much from doing fan art, from gaining exposure to understanding the market, to even the perception of your booth and you as an artist, and what you're interested in. So there's a lot that I learned from fan art, so I don't want to discourage you guys from doing that. But as I go through, I'm going to talk about how I made the switch to original and what the difference in margins between the profit of doing fan art and originals was for me and a few of my friends. I'm going to do my best not to name them just because I don't want them thinking I am putting them on blast or on scope. But I will say I'll give hints as to what they have done, or at least some of the failures that they've gone through and what they took from that and how they moved past and they've grown from it. And that's my favorite part of having a convention crew, or my art friends. There's about probably 14 really close ones, and the 14 of us really try to share information and grow from each other. We see. It's like I feel like we're baby animals watching what the older animals are doing, and we're adapting and learning from them. And in this way, we're seeing what works, what doesn't. Oh, that worked for them. Would that work for me? I'm not sure. I'll try it, and if it doesn't work, I can push it aside. So I'm going to break this down into, let's see what I have here. Essentially 5 sections. The first section is the history. So I'm going to share with you guys my learning experience of doing this for 4 years. Then I'm going to talk about why do we do them, and there's 4 reasons why do we do them. Money is probably the most obvious, and we want a return on the investment we're making, but also we want to feel like we're making money doing art. It's like a pipe dream for a lot of us, and artists have that bad stereotype of starving artists. You can't make a cent, but I'm going to tell you, you definitely can, and you can definitely do it with just making art. Third thing, exposure. I know that's become kind of a dirty word in the art industry, but I'm going to tell you the plus sides of exposure and not the we won't pay you, but you'll get exposure type kind. The fourth one is networking. You'd be surprised by how many jobs you can get by just standing behind a booth at an anime or a comic convention, and I will go through that later. And the last one, honestly, is just fun. I have had a blast doing conventions. This is probably the thing I'll be doing the rest of my life, where we're planning on buying kind of a giant bus van or RV of some kind that we can travel the country on these weekends together. And it's just one of those things where it's been such a great experience that I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I've met so many other artists, and through meeting them, I have felt inspired, and it's pushed me in my own work. And I feel like it is so almost essential for an artist to go to these conventions. So starting off, I'm going to switch my screens here, and I'm going to show you, well, actually, first I'm going to show you, me and Key did a little Sora collaboration behind the booth this last weekend. If you guys have ever played Kingdom Hearts, it has had a huge impact on me and my life and my art, and it was just kind of a fun little nod to the Halloween Sora from Halloween Town in that game. Alright, but anyways, when I started off doing conventions, I got started because my friend at the time, and who is now my roommate who lives in the basement, Gabe, he convinced me to do C2E2 with him, and that's a big Chicago Comic-Con, and I didn't really know what to do. But I went to a few conventions before, and I saw some people have buttons, or maybe you guys call them pins. They're not the enamel pins that you see a lot today, but the circular one with the plastic on top. And I remember looking at boots and being like, I can do that. Like, I could make some pins. And the idea would be just to like put their face on the pin and have it like stretch through the entire thing. So I had to go through a giant process of learning one, how to make buttons. What is the little machine? How much does that cost? I had to figure out the size of the buttons, and there are templates online that you can find that can help you make them. And you have like a bleed area. That's what the blue line on these are. So the blue will wrap around the backside of the button as it gets pushed around. And it was such a learning experience doing buttons, and I had to pop every single button. And as hindsight, I looked at how many buttons I probably made over the years, and it was between 2,300 and 2,800 pins altogether. And that's a lot of individually putting in the Mylar, the art, or no, cutting it first. That was the biggest thing. I had to cut all of these little button sheets by hand and then pop them out individually. So it was a lot of hard work for a $2 product. And at the time, I thought it was great because the profit margin, and well, I guess I should explain. If you guys don't know what profit margin is, it's pretty much take all the expenses it costs to make something, and then whatever you're selling the product, take whatever you're selling the product at minus the cost to make it, and that is your profit that you would make, and that margin is a percentage out of the total cost. So the profit margin was like 90 something percent, which is insane, but it was also on a $2 product. Now I've definitely learned over the years to have better profit margins, or not to have better profit margins, but to have higher cost or higher marked priced items. So rather than having a $2 item with 90% margin, have a $30 item with a 90% margin. And it just grows and grows and grows. And it really depends on what you're focused on at the time. Oh, a few of you guys have a question on the iPad really quick, so I'll answer those. Faithful says, since there are no keyboard shortcuts, does it make drawing slower? I've actually learned I've gotten faster with the iPad because I don't have that shortcut, or I don't have any distractions. I can literally just draw like I do traditionally. Now, like I said, it's brand new, so I might come across some hangups as I keep working with it, but as of right now, I actually really like it. Jay South says, use a screen protector. Heard it affects the pencil, and just got my iPad today. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you got it too. I'm so excited. But no, I do not have a protector. I had one on my Cintiq, but I found I didn't like the way that the pen would move over it, so I actually took it off. So I'm not the biggest endorser of screen protectors, but I should recommend it. I feel like that's the proper thing to do. Miss Chibi Artist says, since it seems conventions are getting pretty popular for artists, is it hard to get a booth? That is something I'm going to talk about in the how do I get them section. So don't worry, I have it all planned out. So why don't I finish up with my learning experience, and then we'll jump into the rest of what I have written down. So anyways, at the time, I remember at C2E2 making like around $700. And to me, I thought that was like phenomenal. I thought that was like groundbreaking. I just breached some unknown territory where you can like, tap for gold as an artist and make quite a return on it. Now, what I wasn't doing 4 years ago, it was adding up the expenses that it costs to actually go to the show. I'm talking travel, the booth, the hotel, and then printing everything. There's a lot of money that went into it. So at the time, I thought 700 was like amazing, but it probably cost me like 800 to 900 to do everything. So it was funny because at the time I thought it was great, but looking back, I probably lost money. Now, that's not to say though, when you first do conventions, you're going to have a lot of upfront capital. And basically that just means a lot of money up front that you can spend on things like booth supplies, the prints, like a tablecloth if you need it, the way that you're going to display your prints. Are you going to do grids? Are you going to do polls? There's a lot of weird upfront costs that you have to kind of just bite the bullet. But if you save up for it and then you get it, then you can use that at every con that you go to at that point forward. So there are going to be a lot of upfront costs, and I don't want to sugarcoat it and pretend like there isn't, and I don't want to tell you guys to get into this and then be surprised when there's a lot of money that you kind of have to have upfront for your first one. And that's something that I'll talk about as well. So with the history of doing it at C2E2, this was my little booth, and it was very, there was a lot of CG Cookie I would say, display. I was trying to do a 50-50 of like trying to sell my own little art and advertise CG Cookie at the same time. And over the years, I've definitely learned how to do bigger booth displays. And this is back when I had more fan art, as you can see here. And then eventually I have just gone all original. So this was my booth starting in January, and this is what I ran with throughout my convention season this year. And then I ended off doing a collaboration booth with my roommate and good friend Gawky. And this year has been such an amazing experience just because I feel like it has become more than like a part-time job for me. It's become a second career that I am now kind of following in. And not only is it just business for me, a lot of it is fun. I have met so many people at conventions, and I have so many good memories. Actually, some of my best memories in my life I've had at conventions. And I've met 3 of my roommates at conventions. 2 of them were just strangers that came up to my booth. So I never want to discourage anyone from doing conventions. And that's why I'm doing this stream, because I want you guys to start doing conventions. I feel they are so important for artists. And I've even met my idol, Alan Williams, and I've had such an experience with him as being kind of like this background mentor, and having the experience of 4 years ago, him changing my life with getting me into traditional drawing. And then this year at Spectrum, him giving me an original, and me literally just crying on the show floor in the middle of this very fancy convention. It was definitely one of those experiences that I'll never forget, and it wouldn't have happened if I didn't start doing conventions. Okay. I don't know why my iPad's going off like crazy. There we go. Okay. Whew. So, what is the most important reason of why I think you guys should do them? Let me switch back over. The most important thing is because this is such a learning experience, not only in how to make money, but you learn a lot about you as an artist and what's important to you. And I feel like if I didn't do conventions, I wouldn't have found my love for traditional drawing and my kind of push and my encouragement to do more original art and really showcase myself in the work. So the other thing, you start to learn how to get over failure. I have failed so much doing conventions, and I guess I'll share my biggest one. I don't like to just say it, you got to show it. So my biggest example would probably be my magnets. So if you guys remember, I was popping all those buttons. Now imagine doing all of that, all of those. I had 77 different buttons for sale. I decided I'm going to try magnets. I thought magnets were a thing that could be great in the market. And I made 77 different magnets for sale. And since I had 5 of each magnet, if you can do the math, that's a lot of magnets that I had to individually glue these magnets on the back of the buttons. And I sold, I think, 40. No, it was less than that. It was like 20. I sold 20 of them one weekend. And I had about just under 500 that I needed to sell. So you can imagine my frustration, my disappointment. And then the second biggest failure was being next to one of my friends who's not even an artist. She just is a fitness coach. And she decided to do conventions on a whim because she wanted to have fun with us. She saw the joy and excitement we were having. And she just made some Pokemon prints. She just painted some prints, had them for sale. She made more money than all of us. And it was so frustrating. I had to take a humble pill that weekend and realize that it wasn't just the product she was selling, it was how she was selling it. She was a business person, and she was great at selling her product. And that's something that I don't necessarily have the skill set for. I did retail back in the day at a clothing store, but I was always horrible at like selling the product. I remember even they told me just to stand by the front and just say the jeans were 50% off today or something along those lines. And it was really difficult for me to have to go up to people that probably didn't want me to say anything to them and be like, hey, just so you know, there's a sale going on. I'm not the best at doing that, admittedly. Anyways, that was a learning experience where now I'm very good at, standing behind my booth, looking at people in the eye, not drawing, not sitting or crouching, because I've learned perception is everything. at conventions. You really need to sell not only your art, but your booth and the perception of you and the product that you're trying to sell. Okay, so now let's jump into it. I know there's probably a lot of questions. It says the sync is off. Well, I hope the audio and the video pick up. Guy Webb says, hi, today's my birthday. Well, happy birthday, Guy Webb. I'm glad you stopped by for your birthday on this stream. Let me answer a few more questions and we'll get back into it. Wix D says, hey, Tim, what is your opinion on open source digital painting software such as Krita and GIMP? Personally, I like to use Photoshop. I feel like it's the industry standard. I would love to get more acquainted with Corel Painter. I feel like that is eventually where I will explore more. GIMP, I didn't have the best experience with. I think it's been a few years, though. It might have updated since then. But when I was using it, it still felt like there were things that were broken that would take me out of the immersion. And it would be like the menu switching or something where it didn't flow as smoothly as Photoshop. Krita, I've heard great things about. I haven't tried it personally as much. I've seen some of my roommates try it, and it looks great. Faithful says, can you show your booths again? I will at the end. And Angie Valda says, so how do you get a booth and what's the process? Okay. So we're going to jump right back into it because that's what this question goes into. So out of the why do we do conventions, the first one is money. And this plays into how do you get them? How do you actually get a booth at one of these conventions? So I wrote down these booths and at these conventions, this is a growing market. So it was actually easier to get a booth a few years ago than it is now. There are so many artists now competing for a spot to be on the show floor that it has become a little more difficult to get a booth. And I have been rejected many, many times. I would say at least 20. So I don't want you guys to think that as I'm talking, I've been accepted to every convention I've applied to. And some of them just take a little more experience to get into, like Emerald City. This is the first year that I got accepted, and I've applied for the past 2 years, or 3. And it kind of took me learning about conventions and figuring out my own booth setup. And then when I finally sent them something a little more composed, a little more polished, I think that's maybe why I got in. I'm not sure how they do their process, or their jury process. Every convention seems to have their own way of doing it. And there's some conventions like Anime Central in Illinois, which is a lottery system. And then you see some conventions where it's first come, first serve. So it's different all around. But like I said, it's a growing market. So you have to be competitive and you have to know when to sign up and how to do it. So when our signups, they're usually way ahead of the convention. I'm not talking a month or 2. I'm talking a lot of the times like a half a year to even like 9 months. I haven't heard of a full year in advance unless if you go to the convention, you have a booth, and then at the end of it, someone comes up to you and is like, hey, do you want to have a booth for next year? And you sign up right there. So sometimes you see that, but usually it's like 6 to 9 months in advance that you have to sign up for these conventions. So plan ahead. If you want to do convention season next year, you better start finding out when these convention Artist Daily opens up. And a lot of the times you go to these websites of the conventions and they'll have like an email, or there'll be, or actually, yeah, usually there's an email subscriber list that you can subscribe to, and they'll send you emails kind of letting you know when the next sign up will be, or some of them will even say like in a week or on the specific date. And you just got to you write it down. Now I'm going to show you guys something that me and my con crew do. I'm not going to show the full image just because I want to respect my friends and what we have created over the years. But I will show you kind of a blurred out version. So essentially we have a Google Doc and we have all the cons on the left side here. We have what they are, when, how many attendees there are, the location, the price, the registration when it opens up, who's doing the hotel, who's doing the airplane, and how big the booth size is. Now, and then we have a list of like who's doing which one, are we accepted, did you apply? And I usually check this, especially during the times when you want to sign up for a convention. Like I have this on a separate tab almost at all times on my laptop. So I would definitely get some kind of system where you can check when you need to sign up, when it is, what have you already signed up for, what have you paid for, things like that. And it has saved me quite a lot of times. And especially if you do it with other people, you can have other people update the list as well. As you can see, like the ones in orange are ones that have already passed. And we all try to contribute and update the list as it goes. So this is something that has been very helpful for me. And like I said earlier, you're going to need some initial capital. You can't just go into conventions with no money and you sign up for one and think, okay, I'm just going to make a bunch of money and, oh wait, I don't have a booth set up. Oh wait, I don't even have prints. Oh wait, I don't have a hotel room for the weekend. There's a lot of things that come up with conventions that maybe you don't initially think about. So I would save up a little bit of money before you do your first convention. That way, when you do conventions thereafter, you can use what you invested in, like the booth setup and things like that, from that point forward. The next thing I wrote down was the anime versus Comic-Con. To me, there is a difference, and you'll definitely see different demographics within each, but you should definitely play your strengths and not cater too much to either or, and really have your booth be kind of, what's a good word? It is able to, I don't want to say cater. It's appealing to both comic and anime fans. I feel like art is something that everyone can appreciate on some level. I feel like there's very few people I've met that just don't appreciate art in any regard that go to one of these conventions. So in my opinion, you sign up for both. I don't think there's like you should only do Comic Cons or you should only do anime cons. I really do think you should do both and play your hand at each. And then you'll kind of figure out which cons maybe are too small or you're not really selling a lot of, and maybe you just don't do them again. Or maybe your quality isn't that great. I think a lot of times as artists, we blame other factors or third-party reasons why we aren't succeeding. But I think a lot of the times we need to hold a mirror to ourselves and think, well, maybe it's us that is the problem, not so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And with conventions, even when I was not selling as much as my friend that was just selling her Pokemon prints, and to her it was just a fun weekend, to me, I was like, well, people just like Pikachu and they only like, or they only buy what they already know. And I was like throwing all these excuses to help me feel better and like feel rest assured that I'm still doing the right path or whatever I was giving myself reasoning for. But in reality, it wasn't true. She was selling more because she had a better product, a better booth, a better presentation. And it's something that after I was able to really kind of reflect on it, I realized, okay, rather than blaming other things for why I'm not succeeding, I need to step up my game. I need to really look at my booth and improve upon it. And I think that's something, another reason why conventions has helped me over the years, because it's taught me to reflect and rework or try new things or experiment to find out what will work over what I was doing before. It's kind of like you're always competing with yourself, which to me is really fun because I'm a competitive person. So then the last thing is plan for hotels and travel, and do this months ahead of time as well. If you're going to a convention out of state, don't just assume that there will be a room at the hotel. I promise you, there most likely will not. They're almost always booked way in advance, and if you don't jump on it soon, you might have a hotel like 7 miles down the road and you're going to have to Uber it every day. Or if you drove, you're going to have to drive and then pay for that parking at the convention every day. Something to keep in mind. Okay, so now before I jump into what to sell, let me see if there's any questions I can grab here. Ferris Moss says, I have a lot of things I'd like to be able to do as an artist, like animals, humanoids, landscapes, robots, spacecrafts, animation, web design, photography, and plenty more. Would posting all these things on one account be a good or bad thing? I'm afraid people could be discouraged or uninterested by my seeming lack of direction. Yeah, that's very true. I think when it comes to Instagram or social media outlets, what we've seen, what works for artists is having a very consistent output of your work. And a lot of the times that means keep your life events to a minimum and keep your art to a maximum and do your best to always post quality. Now, I can do a whole stream on just social media alone, which I do plan on doing, especially Instagram, but that I will save for another time because I know I can ramble on that for a while as well. Guy Webb says, I'm guessing there is an age requirement to do a booth at a con. Usually it's 16. I've seen some that have been 18, but it's been so long since I had to check the age requirement. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it's 16. Bass Animation says, what do you think is better? Lots of different kinds of items feature many different characters, or fewer, more focused items, perhaps of higher quality? From my experience and just with my friends that I have doing conventions, we have seen that it is a more focused booth. Having too many products can confuse the viewer. And honestly, when you think about it in a restaurant scenario. When you look at the menu, do you want a menu that is so long that you can't even read it from the starting where you're standing? Or do you want it pretty short, consistent? It has enough variety, but it's not overwhelming. That's what you should really think about your booth in. If you have so many products, you would think that I just have more to offer. I'll have more profit because I have more items that I can sell. A lot of the times it can hurt you because you have a very limited amount of space that you have to work with on your booth. If you're filling it with a bunch of trinkets and a bunch of random things, it can become overwhelming very quickly. And if you confuse the viewer, or if you in some way make it so that it's obnoxious to look at, the person will not even come to your booth most often than not. So in my opinion, I would keep it pretty simple, but have enough variety. And then you have to learn how to edit. Learning to edit is something, once again, conventions have taught me learning to edit. And even with art, I used to throw everything in a piece thinking the more the better. But over the years, I've learned to edit and focus on the quality rather than just impress them with how much, you know. Guy Webb says, cons have been only a thing for a few years, and there have been more foreign artists that come to sell their art than local artists. Not sure what to think about it. I think that's great. I think you should meet more artists that aren't just local and have more of a variety. Yeah, it can be frustrating if you're a local artist feeling like you're not even accepted into your hometown convention. That can get kind of rough. Like if I wasn't accepted to some of the ones in Illinois, since I'm only an hour or some away, it'd be kind of rough thinking like all these other artists from all over the country or the world are getting these, and I feel like that's my backyard convention. Like I should be there representing my home turf. But it's something where if they're getting the booth, they're doing something that I am not. Once again, going back to reflecting on yourself, if they're able to get the booth, I should be able to get the booth. I just gotta, step up my game. Joe Pasora says, how or when do you know you are good enough for conventions? You don't. I definitely wasn't good enough when I did my first C2E2 convention, but you know what? I did all right. I learned a lot, and honestly, it kind of took 4 years. This is my 4th year doing cons. It took 4 years for me to feel like I am finally understanding conventions a little bit. There's still a lot to learn, and even I have friends, if you guys know who Peter Moorbacher is, I've been talking with him about booth and convention and all this stuff, and he has taught me a lot and how much there is still to learn with doing an exhibitor booth versus an artist alley booth. Now that's something entirely different. That's like if you're willing to throw down $1,000 to $2,000 on just showing or the exhibitor booth itself, and then you can make money off of that. That's great. That means you are doing things right. The art is definitely giving you a return, but I'm actually approaching that level, and that's why this is crazy, because doing conventions has become like a second career in the profit that I'm returning with, and it's been insane. I cannot tell you guys how crazy this journey has been when making over 1,000 seemed like I hit the lottery. And now that I'm making more than that at these conventions, and in some cases a lot more than that, it's been almost surreal to the point where I need to, take, now that convention season is over, is like take a break, take a step back and really look at maybe why there was such a difference between the previous years and this year's. For me, it might be more obvious. I switched to all traditional. I have a very focused booth on just my drawings and swordplay, and that's it. And I raised my prices, and that's something I will talk about when we get to pricing. So let me do one more question, and I'm going to jump back into this here. Max Krabil says, where should we look to for our first conventions? ECCC and other large conventions seem like a ways out of my reach at the level of con experience I have, which is none. If you ever worked a con before, it can be difficult to apply since you don't already have a photo of your con setup. Is it worth investing in a setup and an inventory before being accepted to a con just to have something to show during the application process? Yes. That's something I actually did write down for the booth setup later on my list here. And that's to practice setting up your booth. You don't want to go to a con thinking you know what it will look like and then like struggle putting things up and their pole's broken and you don't even know how to display your prints now. So yeah, to get into the bigger cons, if you're just getting into doing them, there's a good chance that you won't be accepted. I think that's something that you just have to accept. I can tell you now, I wasn't accepted the first 2 years of applying to Emerald City. And even with Anime Central, it's now a lottery system. The last 3 years, I haven't been accepted. This was the first year in 3 years. And it can be frustrating. But don't just rely on one convention. Don't put all of your your eggs in one basket. So try to apply to a few. My first year, I think I did 8. And then this year, I'm doing 13 to 15, depending on how the fall goes. And I think that's a good number. I would say 15 is kind of the ripe number that I want to be at every year. I just want to spread them out throughout the year more rather than have all of them in late April and May, because the past 5 weekends have been kind of a struggle. And last weekend I was even like catching myself falling asleep at my booth, and I think just because the travel becomes so much, and then you wake up and instantly you're standing behind a booth for 8 hours, and then you go out and you're trying to meet people because you're at the conventions. Anyways, try to apply to more than just one, and just know that the big ones are harder to get into. That's just a fact of life. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here, and then I'll get back into questions. So the next section is, well, what do you sell? And the best quote that I've heard this year is, you have to spend a nickel to make a dime. And actually, Digital holds the other quote that I've kind of held dear to my heart this year, which is, money comes and goes. And I love that quote because I feel like a lot of us live under fear and scrutiny of money, where the idea of, money comes and goes. And if there's an experience that I want to invest in, or if there's art piece that I really want to support the artist, that experience may not come again in my lifetime. And this is the only life we have. I know it sounds generic, but stay with me. So invest now. You'll never be fully ready. And especially with conventions, you just got to jump into them. And yeah, you're going to fail. You're going to have a lot of hardships. You're going to have things that don't work. Plan on that. Plan ahead knowing that there's going to be a lot of things that don't work. Or you get there and a pole's broken. Or you get there and someone spills wine or beer on your white tablecloth booth. I'm telling you that now because that has happened to me. And my tablecloth smelled like alcohol all weekend with a stain. Thankfully, I had a cloth that I could put over another white cloth, but you could definitely smell it, let me tell you. Anyways, what do you sell? The most obvious and most apparent would be prints, but I also wrote down some of the other ones that I've seen from, going to other booths and just checking out what their inventory is. So prints are the number one. Books, if you're a comic book artist, obviously you're going to have books in front of you. Sketchbooks are a big thing. Actually, I'm going to keep that under the book category. Sketchbooks, which usually hold like a collection. I have one. I've seen a lot of other artists have their own kind of sketchbook. Zines, I would also put under this category. Zines are like short little magazines. They're usually paperback and between like 5 to 20 pages long typically. Pins, Not only enamel pins, but I'm talking about all types of pins, from your buttons, the big circle ones, to these type of pins, to even patches. Fourth one would be play mats. It's kind of a newer, I would say, product that you see now and those are those big, floppy mats that you can play your card games on top of. You got charms. So that is like your cell phone trinkets. That could be just one of those accessory things, a bracelet, which goes into jewelry. And then stickers. Stickers are a popular one, I would say. Cards, that's more of a newer one. I think Wiley Beckert kind of broke that industry and has been kind of a leader in having other people do it. I know Pete is now doing cards as well, or at least I saw them at ASUN. Figures. So for those of you that are doing more 3D art, that could be clay figures that you are casting and putting in resin molds, or if you're 3D printing. Plushies, so those big plush animals or the little ones that people sew. I even have one in the other room. Or Key has one, but I don't know where it is, but it's a needle stitched plush that someone was doing behind their booth, and those are awesome. And then lastly, commissions. So a lot of people do commissions at the con. So you go up to them, there's usually a sign that is like, I'll draw your character for $30 plus 15 if you want color, things like that. And you'll see a lot of artists behind their booth kind of sketching frantically. And those are the artists that are getting commissions. And there's some people that will do commissions, but not at the con, but you order it there at the booth. So those are just a few examples of what you can sell. Now, where to get each of these made and how to make them, this is where I'm going to push you to find out for yourself, but I'm going to share the first one with you. So prints. I'm going to share with you guys where I think you guys should do prints if you're interested. So when we first started doing conventions, me and my art friend, and who has become my art brother, my convention brother, because we started at the same time, his name's Puiche, really. Let me write it in the comment section. He is a absolutely brilliant artist. I am so glad that this year he's seeing such a return on his investment doing conventions. It has become his full-time job, and he's making a good chunk of change, we'll just say, doing them. But it took 4 years, and it kind of took him experimenting and figuring out what works, what doesn't, to finally find his niche, and it is paying off generously. So I'm very, very proud of him. But anyways, me and him were going through a little print shop in Illinois. He was honestly the best owner of a print house. He would send things to us the next day. Like if we ordered it on Thursday, we would get it Friday morning. That's how good he was at shipping. And he wouldn't even charge us right away. He would wait until we would come visit him to pay him in person. So I had the best experience with prints from the get-go. But I would print my buttons that I would make at Office Max. So it was a lot of trips back and forth. And yeah, that adds up, especially if one of the prints doesn't work or look right. And this is where there's a big debate between getting your prints made and self-printing. I have kind of gone through con season enough where I now do self-printing. I do all my prints from home on my printer over here. And I'm actually going to invest in a new one soon just because of how crazy prints have become for me. Anyways, the big difference is if you're going to do it through other people, yeah, it's going to be quicker. It's going to be more time efficient for you. The only problem is it could come in, or you might receive your prints and there's a problem. They're too dark. They're miscropped. They're too pixelated. Things that you wouldn't know because you're not getting the prints until like 2 days to maybe 2 weeks after you order them initially. And with having your self-printing, you can do it right there, but there's a lot of work that goes in self-printing because you have to print every single one. You have to refill the ink. You have to put in the paper. So there are pros and cons to each, and it kind of depends on what is best for you. But after doing the print house that we were going to for 2.5 years, 3 years, we then decided, that's when I went to self-printing with Pui, but then our other friends decided to go through a service online called Cat Prints. And it's exactly as it sounds. So that is what it is. I put in the comments. So Cat Prints is a very reliable online shop, and I'm not endorsed by them in any way. So this is pure honest review here. I have never used them, but literally 4 of my roommates do. So I have seen the product, I've seen the quality output, and there have been a few times where they come out too dark, but a lot of the times that goes on to them for sending them a file that might be too dark. So that's the chance and risk you take. It's like rolling the dice when you do printing with a service that is not at home. And sometimes it will be a lot cheaper though too. So there's a price difference involved. So like I said, there's always pros and cons. So figure out what works best for you, and just understand that one isn't necessarily better than the other. It comes down to what kind of a person are you. I feel like I'm a very meticulous person. I like to have control over my product, and before I've had a lot of misprints, so I've had a lot of bad experiences where I've wasted 100 on one time. It was like 250. It was a lot of money that just went down the drain because of the quality was bad. So I've definitely learned over the years how to approach it and what works best for me. So I do self-printing, but honestly, the rest is really up to you. Okay, so let me see if I'll grab a few more questions, and then we'll get into a booth setup. Let me scroll all the way down here. Ferris Moss says, didn't you once advise against doing pins because people are more inclined to buy the cheaper products and ignore the more expensive ones? That is, I'm glad you said that. That was actually on my things I want to talk about. So if you offer, well, I thank you, Comment T, for following. So if you offer a lot of low priced items against really high priced items, as someone that is interested in you or your art, they are more inclined to take the lesser priced item. It isn't because they're stingy. It isn't because they're a cheapskate. It's because they want to support you, but they also want, to have some more money to spend on other artists that are at the convention. So just from experimenting over the last 2 years, me and Pui specifically have realized through just doing bigger prints, it usually has a better return. Now, that's not to say that's true for every artist. We've had even some of my friends like Key, she does a lot of stickers. She makes a lot of money off of, I think they're $3 right now. They're a $3 product and 2 for $5. And always offer deals. I should have mentioned this earlier. Always offer deals for anything you sell. People will always look at the deal and consider it. I have a buy 2, get 1 free. Why, thank you, Doskali, for following. I have a buy 2, get 1 free for my traditional prints. They're 8.5 by 11. And like 95% of the time, people do the buy 2, get 1 free deal versus just buying 1. So something to keep in mind. And I'll talk about pricing after booth setup. The question. So I personally have had such a rough time with smaller price items. My buttons were such a pain in my butt. But am I glad I did it? Absolutely. Would I recommend people doing something similar? Absolutely. I feel like you have to go through the process and kind of earn your stripes so that you understand why doing larger things or doing bigger prints or how to present yourself, it's so important, and how to make a return from that. So yeah, I definitely understand that if you have lower price items, people are more inclined to buy it, but I'm not totally against it. Sergeant Guava says, I still love that username, says, Tim, last year you convinced me to sign up for a local con and it changed my life for the better. Thank you. My second con is in September. I can't wait. That is awesome. I am so glad. I hope that the stream inspires other people to do more conventions, because it has changed my life, and I hope it changes your guys' as well. Especially as artists, I feel like we need to band together. I'm not one to keep secrets or not share what I've learned over the years to help you guys, except for if it involves other people, I try to respect their privacy. So that's why I can't show you the Google Doc, but everything else I'm very transparent with. And I would share what I make at conventions, but I would do it in more of a private chat. I think it would be kind of irresponsible to put numbers out there in a way that it might just look bad. But I can at least tell you this. It has been more than worth my while doing conventions. And in my 4th year doing them, the profit has been enough to make me feel very comfortable in a lifestyle that I can live comfortably. So I'm so glad to hear that, Sergeant Guava, and I hope you do more of them in the future. Miss Chibi says, would you consider an expensive booth, or is there a big range in booth prices? Yeah, for next year, I'm only going to be doing exhibitor booths, or mostly doing exhibitor booths. And yeah, those can range from $400 to $1,200 easily. So I have a lot of money saved up for next year. And me and Pui and Key and some of my, the con crew that I go with, we're going to try experimenting with exhibitor booths now. And we have the guidance from Moorbacher kind of giving us advice and tips along the way. So it's not like we're going in blind. And thankfully, we've met him and we've been able to learn from him. And I think that's another thing that I'm going to talk about later in my networking section of why doing conventions is important. Because otherwise, I would have never met Pete, and I would have never had him in my life. So that's another, or even Key, or all my roommates that I've met at conventions. All right, let's do one more question, and then we'll get back into it. Or, okay, Altered Mage says, when is the website being updated? So 6.0, which is the new CG Cookie website, will be updated most likely by the end of this month. I'm pretty sure we're shooting for the last week in June at this point. So look forward to it very, very shortly. Guy Webb says, I hope this doesn't make me sound mean, but I'm looking at artists that have had a booth, and to me, some of the artists don't have that good of art. There are some really good artists, but few. So this is one of those tough areas where art is subjective. I think there's definitely different levels of understanding technically. That's why I love the comparison of like video games to art, because I feel like we level up. But like for me, and for example, I don't have a lot of skill sets in environments, but I have more skill sets in characters and realism. So I feel like I have gear or armor that helps me be well trained for when I'm slaying the realism dragon. Now, when it comes to other people's boots, try not to be mean to other artists. And I'm going to try to say this as genuine as possible and I really want you guys to hear this. When you see someone that you perceive as having a lesser booth, don't make fun of them. Don't like snicker behind their backs. Don't like go up to their booth and like talk about how bad it is. That is honestly heart crushing to an artist that is behind that booth. And they could be a 15-year-old that is just trying this because they were inspired last year by an artist that they look up to, and now they have a booth. It could honestly just take one person to shatter their dreams and to really throw them off their course of becoming a better artist. So don't ever make someone feel inferior because of their boot setup. And that's something I have learned over the years. I think initially when I started doing conventions, it was so competitive. I was comparing and contrasting so much that I think it became toxic to me, because I didn't see the booth as an artist. I saw the booth as just a competition or something that I need to do like one up. But then I realized very quickly that I started talking to the people at the booths, and they are some of the nicest people I have ever met. I have had so many friends that I see at conventions, and a lot of them are just con friends. I see them only at cons, but it is a delight to see them. And I'm so glad that I took any kind of pride that I had and threw it away and just went up and talked with a lot of these artists, because they are genuinely some of the nicest people I've ever met. So never judge a book by its cover with conventions. Just know that they're at different points and different stages with understanding their convention life and their booth setup and what works for them. And they might be that literally could be the first con they've ever done. And if you looked at my first con when I showed you my booth earlier, it was very simple and it looked scattered. If I was honest with myself looking back at that booth, it looked not the best for what I wanted to represent me with. But that was my first con and I didn't know what I was doing. So never, ever discourage someone behind their booth. Okay, so I'm going to go back into our next section because we already hit an hour mark and I feel like I can talk for hours with you guys. So the next one is your booth setup. So actually it's good that you're looking at those pictures because there are some I would say there's three. There's three really popular boot setups. The first one is a cage. It's those wire-framed boxes, and usually my friends call it an art cave because the boxes usually go above and on the sides of you. So then you are like in a little art cave, and you have your art on these wire grid boxes. The second one is PVC piping, which are those, usually they're white piping that you either hammer or you tape, and you build it up and you hang your prints from. And then the third one is a photo stand, which are usually these black stands that will expand out of kind of a smaller pole, and you can pull them out, and then they connect at the top, and you can adjust the height and the width of them. So those are the ones that I would actually recommend most. The cage, a lot of my roommates went that route first, and they definitely enjoyed it, but it could become more of a hassle down the line, especially if you're doing a lot of them to take down and put back up. And then from setting up your prints, be careful with tape. If there is something I have learned with setting up prints over and over again, I feel like I would always tape the backside so that they would like fold down. And I feel like I was ruining so many prints because if the tape just tore some of the print a little bit when I was taking the tape off, that print couldn't be sold. I couldn't sell it unless if I gave it like a discount. So I do string now personally. I've seen other people do like slip cases or plastic sleeves. I've seen people put them on little hooks. I've seen so many creative, like innovative ways to hang prints that I would try something more than just tape. That's a personal, I guess, opinion. You could still do tape, but in my personal experience, it has ruined a lot of my prints for me. Practice beforehand. I have set up my booth in my own house probably 5 or 6 times, and I usually do it once before the con season. So I did it this year when I was trying to figure out, I was like re-scrambling what I wanted my booth to say. Before it was like a black tablecloth and black poles and black hanging cloths. And I realized that like it didn't really show my theme, or it didn't give my booth any individual taste, because everyone usually has a black cloth booth. And this is where you got to kind of put a creative spin on it. And for me, I realized my theme or my colors that I've gone with over the years have been white and gold. So it just made sense to have a white and gold booth and have a tablecloth that was white and go from there. Now, I was taking the chance that it gets dirty, and yes, I will have to buy a new tablecloth before next year because someone spilled alcohol on it. But that's okay. I know that, when you're doing conventions, there are variables that could, affect the things that you're bringing, and yeah, every now and then you might have to replace them. So I'm okay with that, and I think having a white tablecloth is something that I can handle, hopefully, over the next few years. Or then if you go more professional, such as the boots that you see in Exhibitor or my friend Pooey or Pete, really, they have very clean-cut looking boots, and their theme is very consistent. It's almost like you enter another world, or it's like, why, thank you, Falconzera, for following. Or it's like you step into a little shop as if it was in like a medieval setting or in a video game. It's like it creates its own mood, And I think those are the type of boots that you should strive to hit for your own if you're going to do a booth. Have it be memorable. I think that's the word I wrote down. Yeah, memorable. Have your booth be memorable. Oh, yeah. When you're doing your booth setup, there are a lot of variables that you don't have control over. I'm talking of like the height of the booth, the width of the table, the lighting that you're in, where the air conditioning is. There are a lot of things that you're not going to expect to happen, and it's going to alter the way that you have to do your booth. You have to be willing to adapt, because your booth, I had one booth where the air vent was behind me and it was constantly blowing on my prints, and they were doing this like almost the entire time. I've learned to adapt. Now I have a cloth behind my prints, so regardless of where the air conditioning is, they're not going to be flopping the whole day. Or then with lighting, if you get an overhead light, there's a really good chance that you might have awkward, awful cast shadows, and your booth isn't giving you any favors either. Or when people then look at your art, their head is casting a shadow at the art. There are things that you have to adjust. So for me, it was like, instead of having a flat wall, I angled it just a little bit so that the light wasn't getting any shadows from the prints. The prints weren't casting shadows on themselves because of the shift in the angle. And then, what was another thing? Oh yeah, the width of the table. So yeah, it might be 6 feet, but I'm talking about the length or the width of the actual table itself, not the length. That's what I should be saying. So yeah, it's a 6 foot table, but how deep is it? Sometimes it's 2.5. If you're really lucky at a con, it'll be like 3, but I've only had one of those. And yeah, you can then either have more room to play with, or if you have less room, you have to be careful because you might have to learn, or you might have to edit what you're able to display because you weren't planning on having this wide of a booth. And now you're like, well, my setup calls for this wide and I'm only given this. What do I do? You have to be able to adapt on the fly. And then the last thing I had, I think I wrote sharing. You know, it's been a rough morning when you can't read your own handwriting. In terms of sharing, sharing a booth. So yeah, when I got started, we always thought it was smart to share a booth because then it's half the cost and you can share a table with a friend. I have learned this has never helped me ever. Not once. Not once has this ever helped me sharing a booth. So it sounds like a good idea in theory. I feel like in the end, it actually cuts from your profit and your friend's profit or whoever you're sharing it with. If you can, get your own booth, display it where with all of your stuff, you'll have a much better outcome and profit. And I'm not just talking from my experience. I've had at least 7 other members of my con crew share tables, and every single one says it has hurt them in a negative way financially. So it sounds like a good theory, not in practice. Okay, so think about your color, think about your style. If you want it to be more of like a fun, upbeat booth, it might seem kind of weird to have drab colors like neutral gray and then like a burnt sienna represent your booth. Instead, you should have more poppy colors. When Key and I were doing a confectionery booth for next year in which our other friend will run. Or actually, I don't even think I have told you guys what that is. But essentially, we're making a board game together, and it's like a modern Candyland. And we're going to have a booth representing it with like prints and things that represent the candy things that we're going to make, like enamel pins or whatever it is. And the booth, it'd be really weird if we had just like a black booth representing this confectionery candy world theme. So instead, we're going to make it look like a modern Willy Wonka. We're going to have these bright, like bold, rich colors. We're going to have those stripes. We're going to have swirls. We're going to have things that help reflect the booth. And in that way, it becomes memorable, which is the thing that I wrote down before. So stand out. If you can stand out amongst the sea of other artists that you're competing against, then you will do well. And it doesn't mean that you have to like put other artists down. I think healthy competition is important for artists because it helps not only improve us, but it helps improve others because of then they might see your booth and be like, wow, they're really doing a cool theme over there. I should try doing that with mine. And then they'll improve their booth. And then you'll reflect on and be like, wow, they stepped up their game. Have I really updated anything on my booth recently? And then it's just a back and forth. And I think that's why you should surround yourself with other artists because that energy is constantly bouncing. The last thing I wrote, and I underlined it, and I have 2 exclamation points, your presentation, because perception is everything. Not only should you be behind your booth that best represents you and your work, you need to be behind your booth and not slouching down, not like drawing to the side, like looking angry like this. And like when a customer comes, you don't want to be like, what do you want? You know, when I first started doing convention, I always thought it was a good idea to draw behind my booth. And I've learned that it's much better to engage in conversation, look people in the eye, which I've always done. I think it just, for me, I felt uncomfortable because I felt like I was pressuring them to buy something, and I hate being that person. So instead, I try to engage in conversation, and if they choose to buy something, awesome. If they don't, that's okay. And I think as a seller, you have to be more comfortable with the idea of talking with people. And as an artist, I know that you guys might be kind of shy. And trust me, I was a shy, weird kid in grade school, always drawing all of his homework or drawing Pokemon, or actually I had my own Pokemon type thing that I would draw. And it was something that I had to learn, I think, through sports. I actually have a weird history where as an artist, I'm also a sports person. I did tennis and volleyball all my life, and I was the captain of my team. And I feel like that forced me to not only, one, be competitive, but interact with other people and understand how to respect your coaches and how to kind of live up to their expectation. So in a weird way, it passes down onto you where then you become your own coach. As an artist, I feel like you can only let yourself down because no one's guiding you, unless if you're paying for a mentor, then yes, I guess you could let someone else down. But for most of us, it's you only have yourself to let down, and that's a horrible feeling. So the best way to counteract that is to always give it your best, and you can never be dissatisfied with giving it your best shot. At least you tried. And not only have you tried, but you give it your all. And if you fail, awesome, because then you know what doesn't work. So you have a leg up on other people, because then going back into it a second time, you'll know not to do what failed the first time. And conventions have taught me that over and 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 over again. So that's something that I want to really reinforce, is how important experimenting with conventions are, and that you need to embrace failure. It's important. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is pricing. But once again, let me get some questions in before I start blobbing off again. Faithful says, what would you do if you lost your luggage on a plane? I would be in trouble, but I'd have to really think on the fly. I'd probably go to a local print house. I actually keep a USB with my prints on it on me wherever I go. So I kind of cheat the system. If I really needed to get prints made, I could find somewhere. And I guess that would be something for you guys. That'd be like my insider secret, but it has never happened to me before. Knock on wood. So hopefully that doesn't happen to you guys either. Altered Mage says, I've seen people keep small jewelry buttons and stickers in card binders. Was always fun to look through with friends, more engaging with small things and buy one, get ones. It's very true. But now, like I said, I don't want to discourage you from doing small things, but think about the time that someone has to look through a flip book in front of your booth. Let's just say that takes 10 minutes, and then it takes another 2 to 5 talking with them, engaging conversation, and then they finally buy, let's say, 2 stickers. So 15 minutes of your time just bought you $5. And this is why I don't want to discourage small items, but when you really look at how much time you have in a day at a convention and what the return on your time, what is your revenue per hour, a big print, for instance, Pui or Key sell their prints at $40 and $45 for a 13 by 19. Usually people can see it. They don't have to flip through anything for any amount of time. They can look if they're instantly attracted to it. It might be an insta buy. You see that a lot. And then instantly they just made $40, where that other person made $5 through 15 minutes of work. And I forgot what Pui was calling it, but there's a time ratio with money and making sure you're making the most of your time and being the most efficient with your time. So having flip books or anything that take time, you got to be a little careful with. I still think it's a good idea, and I plan to have some in the future. But just know that that could also mean people blocking your booth, so then other people can't come to your booth. So that person that was looking through the flip book for 15 minutes was blocking other people from engaging and possibly buying something as well. There's a lot of factors that go into conventions, and that's why I knew this would be a long stream, and I want to make sure I get to as much as I can. And I'm still on the first page. I'm glad that we have been able to have such a good conversation. Faithful says, but you just shared a booth with Gawky, and we hurt. Admittedly, even Key and I, who have been doing consistently well every con that we've done this year, this was the first con that we didn't do well. And it was partially, I think, the location and the convention in general. They're doing a lot right, but they're just not getting the foot traffic. And also, me and Key were sharing a booth, and I think that did actually hurt us. And even Bass Animation says, I used to share a booth quite a lot, and I can back up the claim that it's not good for you or your pal. It will cut into both your profits. Absolutely. Okay. Faithful says, can't color be difficult because if you work in color, some of those colors won't work at your booth. Have any suggestions on what colors to do and not to do? Absolutely. I'm actually so glad that you're thinking about that, Faith, because it's important. If you have I know someone that has their art displayed on these kind of really, I don't want to say gaudy, but they're very eyesore colors. And I feel like they become a distraction. And I feel like the art then becomes lessened because of the colors that they chose. You want to choose colors that will heighten your booth, not take away from the art. And if you have a lot of colorful pieces, you have to plan accordingly. Key, for example, has a lot of very colorful pieces, but there's definitely a specific tone and a mood that the color creates. And she has these dark maroon cloths, and then I think there's some oranges and purples. that she decorates her booth with too, but they're all more desaturated or not desaturated. They're more rich. They're a little darker, and they complement her work so well. And the only thing that she says she wants to change is she has a black tablecloth, and admittedly it does look very weird amongst everything else, which feels so coordinated and thought out. So yeah, when you're thinking about your colors, honestly, bring some of your work to the fabric store. Place them against the colors. That's what we did when Sean was creating his booth, and it was literally holding the art to the each color of the fabric that he was choosing between and figuring out, does this look nice, or is this distracting, or even worse, is it reductive? And that's, you don't want to go down that path. So instead, I would say a safe route would be neutral. I think having a black tablecloth to start off with is good, because then you can kind of learn over doing a few of the conventions what works for you and what doesn't in terms of colors. And you might be able to then go to conventions, see what other people are doing, get inspired, and say like, oh, that person has similar art, they're doing it on so-and-so color, let me try that color as well and see if it works for me, or some color that's similar to that in terms of the hue, saturation, and brightness. Let me get a couple more here. Zane Drell says, I know this is a kind of a silly question, but do you have any tips on how to make artist friends when you're in an environment where you're the only person pursuing art? Yes. I'm going to talk about that in my networking part. So I do have something to say about that. Lintastic says, is that Angemon behind the pink pig on your shelf? It is. Digimon had a huge influence on me in my life growing up, and I found that Angemon, actually here, I'll get it really quick. There you guys go. The only thing was like, I thought it was kind of, I was like, man, I hope this doesn't read like a weird angel and like a little boy. But for me, TK, I love TK, and I loved Patamon. And this figure I thought was really great. I think it's the proportions of Digimon that always inspired me. They have really long limbs, and they always have like these weird accessories on them, and I always found that inspiring. So yeah, and I found that at Anna Minneapolis a few weeks back. And then, okay, let me find one more. Christy says, so what if you have it hardwired in you to be afraid of failure? I have a problem with this. If you have it hardwired in, you have to fail as an artist and able to succeed. I know that sounds weird, but when you learn what doesn't work, then you know not to do that or pursue it anymore. And then it's kind of like relationships. If you get in a relationship with someone and you realize that doesn't work, or that type of personality doesn't fit me, then guess what? And your next person that you want to be in a relationship with, you're probably going to choose someone different than what you previously had, because that person didn't fit you. It's like trying to put a square circle through, trying to put a circle through a square peg. It won't fit. And I think with art, if you're constantly rehashing something that doesn't work, it's just going to frustrate you. It's never going to work. And with conventions, it forces you to examine what's not working, because otherwise you're going to lose money. And unfortunately, money kind of runs the world. So what do we hold precious to us, unfortunately? Money. And if we're losing a bunch of it doing conventions, then a good chance is we won't do them anymore, unless if we figure out how to change that and actually make a profit from these. Okay, I'm going to go back into the next part, and then we will jump into more questions. So the next part is pricing. So how do you price your items? How do you know what your print is worth? How do you know how much an enamel pin is? The first thing you should do is look at the competition. If you haven't done a con before just jumping into having your own booth, I would actually go to a convention, walk around, and take mental notes. There are a lot of people that price at different ranges, and you'll see some people that are more on the high end, some people that are low end, and you might, think, okay, well, these people are doing a 4 for $20 deal, and you start to feel the pressure. And internally, you start to think, well, if I want to beat them, I want to have something that is more affordable and something that people can look at and be like, okay, well, I can get more if I go to this booth. You might do like a 5 for $20 deal, and then all of a sudden, you're selling 5 prints for $20. Your profit margin is going down, 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 to the point where you're not really making much of you're not making much money anymore or much profit, and it's affecting you because you can no longer make a good chunk of change because you're now feeling you have to cater to compete with the market. And something that I've learned, and with my friends over the years, is you don't have to lower your prices to compete with the competition. If anything, you'll stand out if you have a more unique booth or art that you can't get anywhere else, and you keep it within a reasonable price range. Or some people go a little more toward the high end. I think Pui kind of pushes it more on the high end. He's learned that there's like a point where people are more iffy about purchasing a higher priced item. And even with my own traditional prints, I've had 2 years or 2.5 kind of figuring out what price range works for me. And at first I sold them for $5 because I was still younger, figuring out, will people even buy a pencil print? And that was a big issue for me. And I was almost giving them away for free because I was just excited that people wanted to buy my work. And then this year I started pushing it at 10, and I realized that I was selling out like crazy. I couldn't keep up with the demand at cons, and I was selling out of like 10 to 17 prints at the first 2 cons that I went to. And I realized I should raise my prices because I'm going through printing hell trying to keep up with the orders. So I went to 15, and it was $15 each, buy 2, get 1 free. And this has been my sweet spot. But then 2 weeks ago, I was kind of feeling the pressure just from, my art friends and curiosity of my own on what happens if I did push it higher. So I went to $20, and I was still selling them, but it definitely wasn't as much, and people weren't doing the deal as much. And I was able to learn from doing that and through experimenting that was a bit too much for where I'm at for an 8.5 by 11 pencil print. So I went back to 15, and then the rest of the weekend was great. I made, it was a better flow of traffic buying the prints, but I went through the stages of literally 5, 10, 15, 20, and I found my sweet spot at 15. So you might have to go through a few cons and price things differently at a few of them and kind of figure out, okay, this worked, this didn't. This price range was a big failure. This one was a huge success, maybe too successful. So then you should raise them to the point where you're making a good chunk of change back, but you're not like giving out prints like crazy, because then you either have to print a bunch more or you have to do it yourself if you're self-printing, which can be taxing. And the other thing I wrote down is it's just like freelancing. You have to price it at a point where you're comfortable with the work and the time that you're putting into it, and for the quality output that you feel you're achieving. If there are some people that I feel for them because they are doing these plushies or they're doing something where they're spending, especially the pin doll that I got. I think the pin thing was $75, or no, I think it was $80. And it's this little mushroom. Here, let me grab keys really quick. So it's these little needle-made mushroom people, and she literally like is behind the booth, stabbing it with a needle, putting more yarn in, and wrapping around and around and around and around and around. And she's doing this for hours. So I think each one takes about 8 to 10 hours. And you got to think, okay, with the cost of the materials, the cost of your time, and just the cost of the booth and all that other stuff that you're factoring in, if you're spending 8 to 10 hours on something that's priced at $80, that's about $10 an hour. And you got to think, am I comfortable with that? Does that seem reasonable for the amount of time and effort I'm putting into it? If you do think, yes, it is, then you found a good price point. You could even raise your prices then if you're like, yeah, I feel like, the quality is getting better as I keep doing more of these. I should raise the prices. Or if you're like, man, this is not worth the effort, then you have to raise the prices, because then you might actually be cheating yourself into thinking you're making $80, but really you're making less than minimum wage in some cases. Okay. Oh, and the final thing I want to say with pricing is don't just rely on what you see other people do. you really have to take into account that your stuff is going to be different from the booth next to you. So if someone is selling jewelry for, 10 to 20 bucks, that doesn't mean that your print should be somewhere between 10 and 20 just because you saw this jewelry person doing it at 10 to 20. Yeah, there's going to be competition, and you should always take that into consideration, but it should never make you feel like you have, or pressure you into feeling like you have to lower or cheapen the standards of what you want to sell it at and what you feel comfortable selling it at. But if you're just starting off, yeah, it kind of makes more sense for you to lessen your price, because more often than not, the quality won't be as good. And that could just be in the paper that you're using, and the actual art itself might be not as experienced. When you go to somewhere like Spectrum, you kind of expect the prints to be $30 to $100 because of the artists that you're buying from usually have years of really reinforced experience, and the work that they're outputting, it's worth the buck and the price point that you're putting in, or that you're paying for. But when you're just starting off, and yeah, maybe your art's not where you want it to be necessarily, it wouldn't make sense for you to start off selling things at 50 bucks per print when the skill level might not match the perceived tag value on it. Okay, so let me answer a few more questions, and I'll get into the next section of what to bring. Joe Pasora says, how much do you need to sell? 20 different prints or other things, more or less? I would say you want to find a range between, I would say like 15, no more than like 30, maybe a little more than 30, of things that sell well. And it's kind of like a portfolio. Like, you don't want to just throw everything in just to show the employer what you can do. You want to show the best of what you can do, not some crummy napkin drawing that you did that doesn't really lead anywhere. So in terms of what to sell, I would definitely have at least 10. If you don't have enough, it might look kind of vacant, or the booth might just look underwhelming or even underprepared. And you never want to give that impression, because like I said, perception is everything at conventions. And if it's perceived that you're not prepared, or you don't have kind of a nice booth setup because you're not caring, sometimes the perception is you don't care enough, then that can be a problem. So definitely kind of find more than 10, but less than 30, I would say. And then if you have more than 30, usually if you have like a bunch of knickknacks or jewelry, then it kind of makes sense to have more than 30. But if you're doing specifically just prints, I feel like having 70 prints might be a bit much to have people look at and for you to carry around. Bass Animation says, have you ever argued with or lost friends due to competing at conventions? It used to be very hard on me and my now gone con pals. Someone always felt so down about not doing as well, and it caused resentment. Any experience dealing with that? Yeah, a lot of that. I'm not going to name names, but I guess I'll put myself in this scenario. When it was with me and my friend, who was the fitness instructor, she made more money than me just selling Pokemon and Animal Crossing prints that she just made because painting was like a fun hobby for her. And she made more money than I did, and art is like my career, my main focus, my drive. And yeah, I was bitter. And I had, like I said, I had to swallow that humble pill and realize it wasn't the market that was the problem. It was me. It was the way that I was presenting my booth. It was the fact that I was drawing behind my booth. I wasn't as engaging as she was. And it was a good learning experience. I feel like if you're going to be competitive with your friends, it needs to be healthy competition. If any of you kind of get resentful, or if it becomes a problem knowing each other's money that you're making, that's where it becomes very toxic very quickly. Thankfully, the con crew that I have now are very open about sharing numbers, and honestly, I lose to Key and Pui at pretty much every con we've done this year. And rather than I see it as being resentful, I see it as a challenge. Like, they're putting up the numbers of what they can make, and they're like, okay, Tim, like, here it is. Here's the bar. Can you match it? Or like, here's where the standard, and here's how high the bar is. So, and for me, it's more of a fun thing. I see cons as more fun. It's been kind of crazy the amount of income we've been able to make off of them recently with this year. But ever since that one time with my fitness instructor friend, I've learned not to be resentful. So it's almost like you have to grow up, you have to mature. And I think with being competitive I think money can drive people crazy, or like you can lose friends really quickly because of money. And a lot of the times what it comes down to is your pride is hurt more so than your feelings. And that's what will make people, I would say, resent other artists more so than their feelings getting hurt. It's their pride getting hurt. And just speaking on a personal experience, yeah, that's what happened. And you have to suck it up. You have to realize you're not as good as you thought. You have to realize that what other people are doing is better than what you're doing. And you have to, rather than being resentful, learn from it. Look at what they're doing, absorb it, and then reflect it in your boot setup the next time, or the way that you're presenting your prints, or the print quality that you're doing. Whatever it is to keep stepping up your game, that's what you should be focused on, rather than just blaming other reasons for why other people are doing better than you, especially with your art friends. Like, those are people that are there to support you. Those aren't the ones that you should be trying to knock down. And then if the competition becomes to a point where you're just trying to do better, where you're even like doing things sneakily to try to make them worse, I've heard people like misprint things and things that like you wouldn't expect an art friend to do to you. And now that I'm older and my crew is older, we do a lot of cross promotion. We always kind of encourage whoever's buying from us to check out our other friends at the booth. This is where it becomes more of a positive experience, because then you see a lot of people walking around with everyone from like Von House, or, you know, from our convention crew. They're walking around with all of our prints, and it becomes kind of a cool thing to see someone want to buy specifically just from you and your friends. And I think that's when money becomes secondary. Yeah, it's cool that you're making a lot of money, but you want to enjoy life. You want to have fun with your friends. If you don't have friends to do conventions with, I feel like it would be more of a lonely experience. But I'm going to talk about how to make more friends to do cons with during our networking section. So let me grab one more question, and I'm going to jump into exposure. Let's see here. Faith says, how would you suggest to know what makes your booth too distracting? I want to do a kawaii fantasy theme that matches my style, but I don't want it to distract the viewers, but interest them enough to look at my booth. I also have digital pencil and marker work. Should I try and sell it all? Since I believe this is your first con, right, Faith? I think for you, I would try throwing everything in there, and you'll learn what sells and what doesn't. And then you kind of have to make a conscious decision to take out and edit and filter down what doesn't sell and focus on what does. So if for you, let's say your fantasy, let's say the mermaids that you did, you have a lot of those and you sell them and those become like your bestseller. Well, then clearly you should be doing more of that style of art or something similar to it. Or even if they're pencil prints, if you're selling more pencil than digital, then maybe, yeah, you should explore more pencil. I think when you're doing your first few cons, you should do more of everything. And then through learning what works and what doesn't, that's when you kind of pull back or add to it. So yeah, I definitely think starting off, do more. And then over time, you get to the point what I was talking about earlier, where you have a very focused booth because you filter down what doesn't work over so many years that you only have presented what does work. And that's an amazing feeling when you feel like it's finally working. After failing and experimenting for years, it's finally paying off. Okay, I'm going to go back into our next part, which is exposure. Now, you might be thinking, exposure, like really, Tim? You're going to throw that word at me? No, this isn't one of those you work for free, but you get exposure, or you won't get paid. You'll get a small royalty, but think of that exposure that you'll get. It's none of that. I think for artists, we hear the word exposure and cringe. I know I do. So when it comes to exposure with conventions, it's basically saying you can make more, or you can increase your follower count by doing these conventions. It won't be a lot. Oftentimes it'll be a trickle of followers. Some cons will give you like 100 to 200 depending, or some cons it might be like 10. And then maybe some cons you'll get maybe 2. It depends on the con and it varies, but make sure you have your business cards and make sure that it's very easy to understand where to follow you. I think if you have a business card with too much text, it can become confusing and people just throw them away. I used to have more of an issue with business cards because to me they were just throwaways, like people don't actually use anything with them. What is going on with my iPad? This game though, it won't turn off. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, with business cards, I would try to find the best place to make a bunch of business cards for the lowest amount of cost, because people are going to grab those like crazy at conventions. Minimum I would take with you, especially at like a decent sized con, at least 500. I would recommend like 800 to 1,000, honestly. I've run out of business cards almost every con I've gone to just because I don't bring enough. And I always think that I do bring enough, but on Sunday I always have like a little sign that says ran out of business cards, please take picture of @VonArt and follow there. So bring your business cards and make sure you let people know what social media is the best to follow you on. I always tell people Instagram's where I mostly post because I don't want people following like my art station or something, or my draw crowd, something that I rarely post on. If they really want to stay updated with me, make sure you're giving them the most up-to-date social media that you normally post on. So not only will you get new followers, but you will also meet some of your existing followers if you already have, some people that follow you. And this is where the exposure becomes more than just meeting new people. You are representing yourself, and I am telling you this right now because this is so crucial for you to know before doing conventions. You need to treat everyone you meet with respect. Look them in the eye, listen to what they're saying, and be friendly, be considerate. It's not hard to turn someone off just because of the way you treat them at a con. I've known specifically one artist in particular that kind of gives people a bad vibe, or they give a bad impression off. And then from that point forward, it's hard to look at the art and not associate the art with that bad experience. And that's why all it takes is one like bad conversation. It can be really short, but just that one meeting, if someone looks up to you and you give them like a cold shoulder, if you can't even look at them while you're talking, or if you can't even answer some of their questions, from that point forward, your art has become garbage to them. It has become this toxic reminder of how bad of a personality you are who just happens to make good art. So I'm telling you now, always be friendly and considerate, especially to the people that follow you. And if they come up to your booth, they're like, oh, I'm really excited to meet you. I follow you on so-and-so. You give them the time of day. You make sure you listen to their stories and answer any questions that they have. If there's anything I've learned from Alan Williams, it is to give them more than your attention. Like, ask them questions about their life and what they might be struggling with artistically. And if you notice they have a sketchbook, ask to see what they're drawing. It's like little things that engage you, and it becomes less of like a customer situation and more of like a person-to-person situation. And you can relate to them because you're an artist, they're an artist. And it's almost like you're in this position that they want to be in, in a few years, maybe next year, of like being behind their own booth and selling their art. So you want to make sure that you give off a good impression and inspire and encourage them. Sometimes it can be hard. I know, like on the third day, you're worn out, you're wiped out. You know you have to pack up and drive however many hours back to your home. But do your best to put your best foot forward and, smile and still engage with them and have it feel genuine. The worst thing you can do is make it feel fake, or you're just like, smiling through your teeth that you really want them to go away. That would be another horrible impression to leave with them. And then lastly, there are random encounters that you will meet. I can't tell you how many times I've been offered a gallery show or a freelance job or commission work. I don't do commission work anymore, but I've been offered multiple times at a convention to do work outside of the con. And if you don't want to do commissions, you have, you politely turn them down. You don't try to make it sound mean, but explain why you don't do commissions, etc. But that is something with networking, and that's the last part I'm going to talk about. No, there's two more parts, but let's grab two questions here. Joe Pasora says, how about taxes? That could be a stream all of its own. I feel like that's like a walkthrough. If you're going to be doing, well, you should be doing your taxes for conventions, you want to save receipts from if you're going to like the gas station or food or the booth costs, the prints. You want to save everything because you want to write it off when you do your taxes. Now, I'm not the most tax savvy person. I have done my own taxes the past 2 years, but I usually will call my dad for a little help when I get stuck. But in terms of this kind of stuff, it is good to start familiarizing yourself with it, because if you want to be an artist, and more importantly, you want to be like a freelance artist your whole life or doing these conventions and stuff, it is important to report some of the money, because you can get in trouble if you don't. If you try to like, if you don't report any of it, and let's say you make like an extra 30 grand that year, yeah, you could get into some serious trouble, and you don't want like the IRA coming to your door, or whoever it is, the SWAT team literally breaks your window as they capture you. So yeah, be mindful of taxes. Ferris Moss says, but what if you can do a lot of different types of content at the same quality range? I think over the years, you kind of figure out what sells the best or what people want. Oftentimes, like, hold on. Oftentimes, if you are going to these conventions and you have different products, if you have like enamel pins and prints, and you really like making both of them and you feel both are at quality, well, let's say you sell one print for $30, you sell this enamel pin for $5, you're going to have to sell 6 of these pins to make up for one print. And that's not to say that you should give up enamel pins, but just something for you to recognize that it takes 6 different people with one product versus one person with one product. And I think it is good to have a variety, but let's say you didn't just have enamel pins and prints, but you had like 5 other products that you were selling, then it can become less about your higher end products, and people might be more attracted to those lower end products. You don't want to be your own competition where you're not selling your higher price items because everyone's going for the lower price. Now, money shouldn't be your main, as I'm saying this, it's like money shouldn't be your main reason for what products you're selling on the line, but it's something to be aware of. And if you're passionate about doing enamel pins, you do enamel pins. But if you really are trying to make more of a nickel back or a dime back for the nickel you're investing, then yeah, maybe check at what products are higher priced and what ones are selling, and kind of focus more on those. Tigel says, what is the strangest interaction you ever had with someone at your booth? Oh boy. A lot. The strangest. There's 2 that come to mind this year. The first one is someone was dressed up as the giant Stay Fluff man from the Ghostbuster. I forgot, or Stay Puff, whatever the giant marshmallow monster is in Ghostbuster. He was like, he had to be at 40 to 50, and he was, what's the best way to put this? I'll say inconsiderate. We'll just say inconsiderate, and seemingly not in the best position in his life. And he would take off his Stay Fluff head, put it on my booth, and then like go take pictures of other people. Now, mind you, this is like a giant head that he's putting on my prints on my table. So it's like this awkward, dirty Stay Fluff, and it's not white. It's like this kind of grody. It almost looks like it has like years of sweat and turmoil put into this thing. And it's like just on my booth. And then at one point, he came back, took the head, put it back on, walked away. Came back a different time, put the head down, then put his camera next to the head. So now he's taking up like 3.5 feet of my booth with his stuff. And he is going to talk to these girls. It was very uncomfortable, mind you, watching it too. But then his mother came, and mind you, the mom is elderly looking, like looking between 60 and 70, and like takes the head, apologizes profusely for him, and goes and kind of like yells at him like, what are you doing? You can't be setting these down everywhere. It was just very uncomfortable. And I think I'm too nice sometimes I don't like causing conflict. It's almost like I know that if you just give it time, it'll pass. So I didn't want to like go up to him and be like, hey, can you take your Stay Fluff man head off my table? I was just kind of waiting for him to grab it and put it back on and leave me. That was one. The second one was there was this there was a teenage couple. It was a boy and a girl, or they weren't a couple, they were friends. And they were both very giddy about meeting me. It was kind of sometimes you meet, followers and they're too shy. They don't know how to interact with you. And you try to like calm them down or speak, in a way that engages them. You ask questions about their life. That's the easiest way to make people talk, is just ask questions about their life. But these two were very shy, wanted to meet me for a while apparently. And after talking with them, they left. And then when they came back, they asked to take a photo of me, but not behind my booth. And I couldn't be smiling. It was like a specific set of instructions on taking my picture. It was very weird. And I remember like going next to my booth, but not in front of it, so that they could take a picture of me not standing next to either one of them. And I couldn't smile. So you're going to get these weird interactions with people. And that's, you have to expect that when you're going to a cluster of so many different types of personalities and people, that you have to expect that there's going to be people that are very bizarre to you and that you're not prepared for necessarily. And you have to kind of go with the flow. You have to adapt. So just keep that in mind. All right. I know we have about 10 minutes left. Man, I thought this was going to be a shorter stream, but this is going and going. The last two... there's two more. We'll start with networking. So typically networking is more of a referred term for meeting people in terms of like company relations, things like that matter. But at a show, you can definitely network yourself, and it doesn't just mean people coming up to your booth. Not only should you be meeting people at your booth, but then you should be going to other people's booths. You got to remember that this is a convention full of artists. It's like, what better way to meet other new artists than going just to their booth, especially art that you are attracted to or that you relate to, and just have a conversation with them. Like, they're behind their booth, and in a very weird way, I guess, they're stuck. So even if they don't want to talk to you, guess what? You're there. They're going to talk with you. And you would hope that it would lead to something more than just an awkward interaction, that maybe you could become friends. Like I've said, I've met many of my own friends today and even some roommates just on randomly encountering other artists at these conventions. So be sure to not just stay behind your booth the whole time, but actually interact with the other artists there. It's literally the easiest way to meet new artists is doing it at a convention, especially local artists, because usually people that go to conventions, they're usually somewhat in the area. There's a lot of people that will travel far and wide, but for the most part, they're usually within 2 hours of wherever the convention is, especially with like big city ones like Seattle or Chicago, or sometimes with like the New York or California ones. That's where people will fly in, or even I guess with like Emerald City in Seattle, yeah, people will fly in from all over the country. But for the ones that are more like medium-sized cons, and you'll definitely see a difference between small, medium, and large-sized cons. With the medium ones, usually they're a bit more local. And when you can find people that are more local, guess what? You can have people that you can hang out with outside of doing conventions. If you want to go to an art hangout, or just maybe catch up and go see a movie or play video games or whatever you kids are doing nowadays. But it's the easiest way to do it. And after a while, after you do a bunch of cons, then all of a sudden those 2 people that you met become 5. And after a while, that 5 becomes 20. And then maybe after a few years, some people fall off. Conventions aren't really their thing. Maybe art isn't really, they're not as passionate about it as they were a year or 2 ago, and they kind of fall off. That will happen. That's what happens with friendships. You can't just expect every person you meet or every friend you have is going to be like a lifelong friendship that you're going to keep in touch with. Especially in the art world, it's going to be kind of a rotating door where new people will come into your life and some people will go out. And that's just how it works, especially with if you become very passionate about doing conventions or doing art, you're going to attract other passionate people. And maybe the people that aren't as passionate will kind of go and find other people that are less passionate. I know that sounds terrible as I say it out loud, but it's true. And I've seen it happen over and over again, not just with my friend group, but with other friend groups. And then in the end, if you feel like you are passionate about what you're doing, in the end, you'll have this collection of people that are equally, if not more passionate, or maybe a little less passionate, but usually equally passionate about doing it as well. and then you can just build off each other, and you can like feed that energy back and forth, and that's great. So meet other people at these shows. That's I can't express how important that is as well. Okay, now the last thing I'm going to do before we answer our last batch of questions is, what do you bring to a convention besides the obvious of your prints and your booth setup? I would always have an extra box of extra things that you might not think you'll need, but I promise you, you will. I have come in handy so many times, and I'm talking about the essentials. I feel like me and Pui and some of my other friends, we have our own kind of extras that we throw into our box that we bring to every single con. Like Pui brings 2 umbrellas to every convention. Is that necessarily essential? I don't believe so. Has it helped? Yeah, maybe once or twice in the past, but that, I guess that just depends on what type of person you are. But the things that I would definitely bring, and make a laundry list for yourself, are like scissors, tape. Tape was a big one. Change is an even bigger one. You might go to a con and people, what if someone gives you 100 and your item is, this has happened 4 times when I did buttons, where someone gave me $100 bill for a $5 batch of 3 buttons, and I had to break it and give them $95 in change. So be prepared with a good chunk of change that you can then, give back to them, especially if your prints are at, or if whatever products you're selling are at weird price points. If it's something like $18 or $23, you got to have some singles on you too. Now for me, since my things are increments of 5s, I usually bring a lot of $5 bills and $10 bills. And that's usually all I need. I don't need usually single dollars, or I don't bring 20s. Usually after the con's going for a while, your profit can become your change, where you don't need like that initial change, but that initial change is really helpful for the first day. Or if the last day, usually people are paying sometimes very weirdly, or sometimes even on Saturday, where they'll pay in like increments of 20 or 50 only. It's very strange. Like even with, if it was like a $12 product, rather than paying you 15 or 12, they would pay you 20. So just something to keep in mind, to always have a good chunk of change with you before the show. To always have a Square or a PayPal reader. I would say 1/3 of the profit I make is in credit card. So if I didn't have a reader, I would be losing 1/3 of the sales that I'm making, which is a good chunk of change that would be lost because I didn't spend the time to buy a $10 Square reader at Office Max down the road. Make sure you have a pencil, a marker, and a pen, and maybe a few of them. You never know when you might need it to make like makeshift signs, or if someone wants you to sign your work, or if there's a permanent marker to make like a be right back sign. There's always weird things that you need a pen, pencil, or a marker for. So just bring all of them. Food. You wouldn't necessarily think about it, but you're going to be behind a booth for maybe up to 8 hours at a time. Sometimes the last con was like 9, I believe. So I always like to have a few snacks with me behind the booth, especially going vegan. I want to make sure that I have something to eat, because sometimes the food courts that they have might not offer anything that, or if, even just for you, that might appeal to you. And you want something that you can feel satiated eating and still feel like you're getting energy. A lot of the times I just like to fill up on big things like granola bars or bread or bananas. I feel like bananas are a big one for my con crew. We always have a bunch of bananas passing around. That sounds kind of weird, but usually we have like 2 bunches of bananas, and then we just take from that. And make sure you have extra supplies. This is something that has kind of defeated me a few times, of like bringing an extra set of poles if you have them, bringing an extra set of fabric, or things that you already have, but you never know what could break. At one con 2 years ago, one of the poles, the screw came loose and it wouldn't go up and down, so that we had to like duct tape it. It was a very, very interesting scenario, but duct tape would be another thing I'd put on the laundry list. And just have like a little box of just extra things that aren't necessarily for anything specifically, but they're always there to help in case you need it. It's like always be prepared, that kind of mentality. Okay, that is everything that I had off my list here. Let me answer a few questions, and we're gonna call this one off here. Joe Pasor says, when you go to see other artist booths, who watches yours? Typically, no one. it's kind of a bad habit of mine. I really like meeting new artists, especially this year. I feel like I've taken it more a part of my convention time to go meet new artists. So I'll usually just put a sign up that says like be back in 15, and it typically works. Otherwise, if I have someone like a friend that's walking around the convention, I'll ask them to be behind the booth, but I try not to do that too long because they're there to enjoy the convention. They don't want to just be standing there selling your art because you decided you wanted to leave your job essentially for a little bit. And you got to treat this like a job. There was one friend that I got really upset with because they came late, not only every day, but on a Saturday when it opened at 10, they weren't there until 5 hours later. And if you don't respect the convention and, going to the booth and getting ready and preparing, then people aren't going to respect your booth. And there are so many artists, like I said earlier, this is such a competitive market now to get into conventions. It's almost a sign of disrespect to the artists that didn't get in or got rejected when you're coming late or you're not behind your booth for most of the day. And it just shows a sign of disrespect to the people running the convention as well. So if you're going to be doing conventions, you gotta commit and treat it with some level of commitment, or a full level of commitment, really. And you should be there on time and plan ahead, especially if you're like waking up in a hotel room. You want to wake up like an hour beforehand, make sure you get ready, and then give yourself enough time to get to the convention so that when the convention starts, you're there behind the booth. Tijel says, got any tips on going to cons abroad? I'm actually going to Belgium later this year, mostly due to Tijel. And I've done one other convention abroad in Australia 3 years ago, or 2 years ago. And my biggest piece of advice is pack efficiently. You're going to have to somehow plan out your entire boot setup for like a carry-on and a checked bag of luggage. Now, I would say I'm more inexperienced with this. I would want to talk more with Pete about doing shows where you're flying more stuff. I'm assuming it would be like checking 2 bags instead of 1. And that's something I definitely could do. But yeah, you definitely want to plan ahead of like what can fit on an airplane, what can't. Maybe there's some things with your booth that would fit in a car for local, but for international ones, it just doesn't make sense. So I would say be more efficient with international ones. Guy Webb says, have people ever showed you their portfolio or their art to you at a con? I would say at least once a con. Like it doesn't surprise me anymore. A lot of people that usually, if they know me from CG Cookie, they'll want to like show me their work or show me like what they're working on currently. But a good example of someone doing this was actually Key. She came up to my booth at Wizard World 2 years ago, and she wanted to do an art trade. And an art trade is essentially you and another artist that's at the con will trade a print rather than giving each other money, because it's almost like you're giving each other your money back. It's like instead of just doing that, just trade the art. And with her, she came up to my booth with a portfolio, and it was one of those weird scenarios where I was already following her. So when I opened the portfolio, I was like, oh, I know your work. So yeah, and if you are confident enough, because it does take some courage to go to someone and ask for an art trade or to show your portfolio, and they're behind their booth trying to sell stuff. So, and if they're really busy selling things, and if you're one of those people that show your portfolio, try to find them when they're not super busy with selling, and maybe it's like on a downtime, you can go up to them, and that makes more sense for both parties involved to then have that interaction. Okay, let's see here. 1 or 2 more questions. Coco Shock says, thank you, Tim, for sharing your inside and advice about doing cons. My inside? What have you seen inside? No, you're welcome. I think this is something that I have had on my mind for a while, and after doing cons so frequently, it's been just like, it's so fresh and raw in my mind that I feel like now is a good time to get my opinions out there and have this conversation with you guys if you have any questions about it, because I feel like I'm so familiar with them right now. Cactus says, what do you do behind the booth? Draw / be on the / try to lure people in. I try not to be on my phone at all. I rarely am on my phone. I feel like I lose my phone more often than I'm on it, or I know where it is. I try to stand behind my booth. I usually have my hands like behind my back or in front, and you just kind of wait. And then when someone approaches your booth, I kind of let them be first intrigued by the art. And if they take a step forward to my booth, I see it as an invitation to say, hey, how's it going? Or, how have you, if they're holding a portfolio or something and be like, oh, are you an artist? Or if they say, oh, your art's amazing, then you can be like, oh, thank you. And they're like, man, I wish I was this good. Or, man, I wish I was working harder on my art. Then that's when you could say like, well, are you an artist? Like, what kind of art do you do? And you kind of pick up on what they say, and then you throw it back as a question. And that way a conversation begins. Because otherwise it can be just a really awkward standing there, trust me, this happens all the time with me, where if they don't say anything when they approach my booth and I'm like, hey, how's it going? And they just they nod. Like, obviously they don't want to interact as much. So I'll usually leave them alone. I'll tell you okay, you know what? You can just look, I'll stay here. If you need me, I'm here. And just kind of present it with that attitude. Okay. We're going to end off with Guy Webb says, what's your next stream going to be? Next one will probably be on another drawing one. I'll do a demo of something, I'm sure. What that is, I'm not sure of. I've been messing with the iPad Pro, so maybe if I could figure out a way to do that live. If not, I'll probably do something with curving your lines. Especially, I've been doing a lot of life drawing on the iPad Pro, and a lot of it is exaggerated proportions. So I might do some of seeing how a body's shaped and then really exaggerating those shapes and having fun with the angles and pushing it out. Sometimes I think I'm so conformed, or not just me, but people that are more of a realistic or have more of a realistic mindset. We're conformed and restricted to exact 100% human proportion and the look of the human body, where if you can see a shape and pull it out, or really jank out a shoulder, or if they have some excess skin on them, if they're a little thicker, you can really bring that out and play with the shape there. So that's something that I think I would want to have fun experimenting with on a stream. Plus, I think we've had kind of 2 back-to-back, or I guess no, this was more of a lecture. Last week wasn't. This was more of a lecture stream, so thank you guys for coming and listening to me babble for 2 hours. So I think next week we'll counteract it with more of a drawing one. So thank you guys so much for coming to this stream. I do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time for a CG Cookie, and I usually post an hour or 2 beforehand, or usually 3. I would say I've gotten better. Usually 3 hours beforehand of what I'm doing that day, and yeah, we do these every Wednesday. So I hope you keep checking them out. And for those of you that are interested in conventions, I say go for it. Don't wait for you to feel ready. Just do it. I can tell you right now, my C2E2, that's right, I said I would show it one more time. My first C2E2 booth was horrendous. This is not a good representation of myself or what I would like to showcase for me as my work. And then it's grown to something more along this lines. And then even next year, it'll be something, I'm already planning on something bigger. So I can't wait to show what that will look like, because I got to figure out what it's going to look like. Thank you, Starman, for following. And yes, you all get fridges today. Awesome. Okay. Thank you guys. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you next week. Okay. Bye. 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 Bye.